When do you actually pay yourself first? This was a question that I asked the coaching client of mine last week. And it's really kind of stuck on my mind because I think it's a really important question. And by pay yourself first, what do I really mean? Like, what's the actual problem? I think the problem is that many of us, we give to others around us. We give so much, whether that be financially, whether that be with our time, with our energy, our experience, our knowledge, our care. And yet, when it comes to actually giving ourselves those things, we're reluctant. And of course, by the time we've given all these things out, we're giving from an empty bucket anyway. We've got nothing left to give. In this video, I want to talk about a very real problem that I think many of us have probably inherited, whether that be from society, from our parents, from the place that we work in. And I think that problem is whereby we try to pay others before we pay ourselves. And as a result, we end up burnt out, empty, and completely unsure of who we are. And so let's talk about then, like, that problem. 15 years ago, I was working in southeast England, just outside of London. I moved there from the northwest, which was, where I was born and raised. And I got this dream job, absolute dream job, working in amateur boxing. And I took that job, and I packed everything that I had into a suitcase, and I moved down to Kent in southeast England. I managed to rent a 1-bedroom flat. I didn't know anybody down there. I had no family, no connections, no friends. And then I just rocked up on day one, at my new office. And there was nothing really there for me. There were some wonderful people who took me under their wing, who supported me. They didn't really have to, but they did. But essentially, that was the beginning of a chapter in my life whereby I was paying everybody else first. I was paying my energy to the job. I was working, every daytime hour there was, from the moment I got up to the moment I went to sleep, I was working. I barely spent any time in my flat. There was no TV or anything like that. It was purely just somewhere for me to lay my head, cook a meal, and that was it. It was a base. And for 12 months solid, that's how I lived. I ended up having 3 jobs. The one main job that I moved down there for was actually like a part-time role. It was only 3 days. And so I then took on 2 other jobs to try and make sure that I could afford to live, pay the rent. And in that time, I just grafted. I was young enough to get away with it. I was late 20s. I was very much in my prime, physically. I didn't have any dependents on me. Didn't have any kids. My parents were self-sufficient, and yeah, I could do it. And so for 12 months, that's what I did. Every daylight hour I was working. Every non-daylight hour, if I could, I'd be working. Every evening I would be visiting a different boxing club. I would be travelling hours on end every day, tens of thousands of miles. I would be responding and reacting to anything and everything around me. You know, the moment an email came in, the moment I sensed that somebody I was working with wasn't happy or wasn't satisfied, I would bend over backwards for them. I had sleepless nights worrying about my work and about whether I was doing well enough. And essentially, I just used everything that I had for the benefit of everybody else. And I felt at the time like that was the right thing to do. I felt like it was philanthropic. You know, I felt like, especially because I was working in an industry with volunteers, because in sport for development, most people were volunteering, whereas I was taking a very modest wage. And so the people I was serving were volunteering their time. And that meant that I would never say no. You know, I felt a true obligation. I felt like a duty to serve them. And what that meant was that after 12 months, I wasn't really sure who I was without that work. You know, everything I was doing was that. The only thing I had to write home about was my work, and it was exciting. I absolutely loved it. It was a joy. It was a privilege. Taught me a great deal. But that was all I had. And eventually, 3 years in, things had changed, things had developed, but I was very much working the same job, but just more of it. And I think that's very common for a lot of us. When we embark upon a career path or embark upon something that we're good at and we're devoted to, we are rewarded with more of it. And that means that if we've started from a place whereby we're giving, and always dropping ourselves and our needs down the pecking order, then when we get more of it to do, all that will do is just enhance and exaggerate the same process, the same amount of giving. And if I was talking to my younger self now, I think my younger self would probably dismiss these concerns. They'd probably say, well, don't worry about me. Like, I can handle it. Like, I felt bulletproof. Like, I was late 20s. I was fit. I was able. As I say, I had no dependence. And I could afford to just dedicate myself to a job. Or 3 jobs, as it was. So my younger self right now would just be like, don't worry about it. Like, this is what it's all about. This is what life's about. Just run yourself dry. Doing something that you believe you've always wanted. And it's difficult to disagree with that. It's very difficult to disagree with that. It's only later, when you get to look back on that period of time, that you then start to consider, how would things be different if you were to pay yourself first? You see, there was no area of my life for those first 12 months when I moved to Southeast England for this job. There was not a single thing in those 12 months that I was doing to pay myself first. So I only went and exercised or went to the gym, which is probably one of my most favourite things in the world to do. I only exercised when everybody else was sorted out. When all the visits had been made, the phone calls had been made, the emails had been replied to, the funding application had been completed. When all of those things were satisfied, and only then would I then allow myself to go to the gym. And even then, if I'd planned to go to the gym but something else came up and somebody else needed my time, I would quite happily drop everything, cancel my gym trip completely, and drive whatever amount of time, an hour and a half, 2 hours, each way, just to visit, just to have a conversation, just to deliver a form at 8, 9 o'clock at night. I wouldn't think twice about it. If there was a show going on a Saturday night, I would be there. If it was a boxing tournament for one of the people who I was serving and supporting, and they invited me down there, even if it was the day before, I would totally sacrifice my weekend and I'd go. So much so that if my girlfriend, my now wife, was visiting me that weekend, we would both go to the show. And it became a bit of a laugh and a bit of a joke that we'd sort of talk about how many boxing shows over those years my wife would attend, and we laugh and joke about it now, but the truth is, I was going to these shows and I was then spending all the time talking to the people who I was trying to support, the boxing trainers, the people who ran the boxing clubs. And my poor wife, God love her, would be sat there, watching amateur boxing on her own, in some cold leisure centre somewhere on a Saturday night. And then we'd arrive home, at silly o'clock in the morning, and that would have taken up a massive chunk of our weekend. And I wouldn't think twice. I wouldn't think twice about doing it. Now, it's not just that my poor girlfriend made sacrifices for me and for what I prioritised at that time, but it's also what I needed. And again, you only see that in hindsight. You only see that after the fact. And if I could look back now, I just start with really simple things. Like, I would say to my younger self, protect your time. Like, pay yourself some time first. So just create some boundaries. Because that's one thing during those first 12 months, I had no boundaries at all. I would be personal training people at 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning. I'd then be on the road visiting boxing clubs up until 6, 7 o'clock that night. And then I'd be back into the gym, personal training someone till 10 p.m. Rinse, repeat, every time. I wasn't looking after my own exercise. I wasn't looking after my own nutrition. I was grabbing what I could when I could. And I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And I think that the reason why we should all pay ourselves first is because not only will we benefit personally? Which seems obvious. That seems like the reason why you pay yourself first. But the real reason why we pay ourselves first is so that we can then better pay everybody else around us. Recently, a good friend of mine was chatting with me about stress. And I said to them, like, I used the analogy of a cup. And I said, you know, your cup is overfilling with stress. You need to decrease your stress. And my friend very rightfully said to me, or increase the size of your cup. Which is brilliant. And really that is what we're doing when we pay ourselves first. We're increasing the size of our cup. We're enabling ourselves to increase the capacity from which we can give. And therefore, we can give more. And that is really difficult, I think, to comprehend. And I think if I was talking with my younger self now, who was back in the southeast in those first 12 months, they would have found it difficult to believe that. And even if they did believe it, they would have found it even more difficult to do anything about it. And to actually be persuaded to change what they were doing. So paying yourself first, whether that be going to the gym for yourself first thing in the morning, whether that be, you know, paying into a savings account the day that you get paid your salary, whether that be booking in a social event, you know, for a weekend that is a non-negotiable, you know, for which you will not cancel. You know, these things are paying yourself first. They're giving you that exercise and movement and health. They're giving you that long-term wealth, and they're giving you those stronger relationships with friends. And they're the things that I was sacrificing. And I was lucky. I was really lucky. I got away with it. I was really lucky. I got away with it. But I can look back now and I can say without hesitation that I would have prevented myself a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, a lot of hard work, and a lot of debt if I just started paying myself first back then. Now, I started this video talking about a client of mine, and I see that client on a weekly basis, as I do all of my coaching clients. And we talk about topics such as paying yourself first, how you could invest better in yourself so that you can then invest better in others. And if that's the type of thing that you would be interested in, then click on the link below in the description and it'll take you to a page whereby you can book in for a consultation call. We'll have 1 hour just to get to know each other, figure out whether or not it's a good fit and that we can work with each other. And then after that, we'll book in for a 6-week block of sessions whereby we'll try and get you from where you are now to where you want to be.